Well, welcome to Journey Church. My name's Jamie. I'm one of the pastors here. We are in a series called Anthology, Discovering God in the Sacred Text. If you're a guest with us, I just want to say to you, we started this probably 5 or 6 weeks ago, and all of those are podcasted and video casted on iTunes and on our website. And this is a progression. So we do encourage you to go back and catch those because we're referencing some of the places we've been. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. In the middle of that, on streams of theology. So I thought I'd start this morning by just telling you a story. This story comes from Matthew chapter 18. We've been reading a lot from the book of Matthew. And Matthew is the first book that emerges in the New Testament. So there's these 2 testaments, these kind of 2 organized groups in the Bible. There's 66 books total. But this second group is called the New Testament. The very first book there is the book of Matthew. And it's a collection of the stories of the life of Jesus and some of his teaching. So we're in a progression in the life of Christ, and where we are is Jesus has spent some time ministering to people, healing people. There's been signs and wonders and teaching, and there's been conflict with the religious establishment, and he's been collecting followers. There are 12 in particular that follow him around, and he's like their rabbi and their personal teacher, and they're like an apprentice to him. And so they've been kind of on an insider track getting certain information because he's been developing them. Because there's going to be a point in time where he leaves the planet, at least in his current form, and he is going to ask these 12 to kind of carry on the message. One of the 12 has a tragic experience, suicide later in his life, and they replace that guy with another one. And there are these 12 that kind of go into the world and begin to share this message. And so Jesus is investing a lot of time in these 12. And he's been telling a lot of stories, and a lot of times his stories are like in riddles, and they're full of metaphor and analogy, and half the time the 12 are going, we don't know what you're talking about. But Jesus keeps telling them, well, there's a shift that happens. As they're doing life together, there's a moment where these followers begin to put it together. They're starting to see what they couldn't previously see. And there's a moment, and I actually told this full story earlier in the year, where they arrive in this city called Caesarea Philippi. It's kind of a resort city. It's pretty far off the beaten path. But they're hanging out there, and there are all these temples. So if you were there, if you were like away on vacation and you needed to go to your favorite temple to worship, you could. All these temples, and actually if you go today, it's been excavated, and it's easy to see because a lot of these were set into a massive rock, and the rock is still there, and some of the carvings in the rock are still there. And there was one, the Temple of Pan in particular, that had a thing inside it called the Gates of Hell, and this is all part of the story. Well, Jesus is there, and he's talking to his followers, and they're starting to put some things together, and there's a moment, kind of a lucid moment, where he says to them, well, who do people say that I am? Here are all these other gods, and he says, who do people say I'm? So there's some talk about reincarnation. Well, some think you're Elijah, and some think you're John the Baptist, and some think you're some other prophet. And he goes, who do you say that I am? And Peter, kind of speaking for the group, goes, I think you're the Son of God, the Messiah. And it's a big moment because for the first time they're putting together who Jesus really is. Now, there's a whole lot they haven't put together, but they put that together. And so it's kind of this statement of faith, and so Jesus pulls them in, and he says, this is amazing that you're starting to see this. However, I don't want you to announce it publicly yet because there's a timing thing. And they kind of look at him like, okay. And he just continues to talk to him. And now he shifts some of his dialogue. As you read the kind of sweeping arc of the book of Matthew, the dialogue shifts, and he talks less in parables, and he starts speaking more directly. And it's almost like kind of like a teacher would or a coach going, okay, it's almost game time. Let me get real clear about what's coming up. And so he says to them, here's the deal. I'm about to enter into a season of suffering. I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be abused. I want you guys to pay attention because I'm going to die. And so they're all listening in. And this is where we pick up the story in Matthew 18. They're all listening in. And they're like, yeah, cool. Anyway, who's going to be the greatest? Once it's time to like have our own kingdom, who's going to be the greatest in it? Have you ever had the moment with your kids where you're talking about a serious thing, like, kids, we're going to go in here, I need you to be quiet, something happened, and they're like, great, can we have candy? Like, you're like, yeah, I'm not sure that translated. Like, it's that kind of a moment. Jesus is saying, I'm going to be betrayed. But he'd been talking about this kingdom for so long. Their minds they just haven't yet grasped that. They still think he's ushering in this new kind of kingdom, like we're going to displace the Romans and take care of all these religious leaders who are shaming people and in all kinds of destructive, powerful systems. We're going to blow all that up and we're going to have a new kingdom. And so they're still like, I'm going to be like the mayor, right? He could be the governor, I'll be the mayor, he'll be a senator. Like, what's my role? Who's going to be the greatest? Like, pick me, pick me. So that's what's going on. It's pretty childish. And that's where we pick up the story. Matthew 18, verses 1 through 7. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus. So then they said, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Again, right after Jesus has gotten through saying, I'm going to suffer. This is what's going to happen to me. So I imagine it like this. There's a pause. He's sitting in a home, possibly Peter's home, or he's at somebody's home. And I just picture Jesus kind of dropping his head like, okay. Sweetheart, come over here. A little girl comes over, calls a child and has her stand in front of the middle of them. And he says, I'm telling you the truth, which is his way of saying, please pay careful attention. Unless you turn inside out and become like a child, you will never, ever get into the kingdom of heaven. Unless you stop being childish and become childlike, you're not going to enter the kingdom of heaven. You're not going to get it. And he's talking about this kingdom of heaven thing. And if you've been around Journey any length of time, we've talked a lot about the kingdom. And we're gonna circle back to this. I'm gonna come back and elaborate on the kingdom if that's kind of a new concept for you. But he's saying, hey, the kingdom is not this thing I'm building where there's a new domination power structure. It's a totally different way of being, and it looks like a child. This child is now the metaphor of the moment. This child is now the illustration. So if any of you make yourselves humble like this child, well, then you'll be great in the kingdom of heaven. And if anyone welcomes one such child in my name, it's like they're welcoming me. And here's the contrast, by the way. Whoever causes one of these little ones to believe in me, who believe in me, to trip up, it would be better for them to have a huge truck tire hung around their neck and drown far out in the deep sea. At least if he was teaching today, truck tire. And it's contextual, right? So he says a huge millstone. So probably he's standing nearby and there's a millstone. And I've actually been to Peter's house, that location, and there's a big old millstone outside. A millstone would be this huge stone. And then there would be another stone that would roll inside it, and it would be what would crush the grain. It'd be pulled by a donkey or a mule, and they're massive, they're huge. So he probably just looks over and he goes, hey, and by the way, if you cause a child to stumble, or you cause someone in the faith who is acting like a child, in a childlike way, and you come and you poured cold water on that sense of wonder, it would just be better for that to be tied around your neck, you to be taken out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee and drown there. I'd rather have that happen than someone come and squash someone's childlike wonder. It's a terrible thing for the world that people will be made to stumble. Obstacles are bound to appear and trip people up, but it will be terrible for the person who makes them come. Do you know what the sad part is about this teaching? For a lot of years in the church, we've placed obstacles in the way. We've created ways for people to stumble. Unfortunately, the church has been preoccupied often with creating complexity, not simplicity. Churches have a tendency to just want to add more rules, more regulations, more expectations. And we just have this tendency to add more. A tendency to want to box God up and then box up our interpretations of God. And then put you in a warehouse full of boxes. This is what the church has done for years. Abraham Joshua Heschel writes this: faith is not the clinging to a shrine, but an endless pilgrimage of the heart. We sometimes meet someone with a childlike wonder, an enthusiasm and a curiosity, and we say to them, yeah, that's just emotional and it's going to go away. You need to do this. Or stop having that kind of wonder and enthusiasm. You shouldn't be like that. The church sometimes uses shaming language and control mechanisms to squash the very essence of the kingdom. And instead we build a shrine. And Heschel is pointing out we have a tendency to create idols instead of recognizing that this is a lifelong journey, a pilgrimage of the heart. I want you to think about something. Some people cling to their 8-year-old understanding of God and refuse to move from it. Some people hold on to their 14-year-old perspective of God and refuse to move. Some, it's their 22-year-old or their 30-year-old perspective of God, and they never change. And maybe it's because somebody taught them in some religious structure, hey, once you believe this, hold on to it, defend it, and never change it. But do you realize what, unfortunately, I think we've been told is never change your understanding of God. But do we do that in anything else in life? How many, if you have more than one child, anybody got more than one kid? Raise your hand if you have more than one child. Okay, first kid comes along, right? I remember first kid, this was a long time ago. Almost 24 years ago. Well, we had 2 at one time. So first 2 kids came out. Pacifier falls on the ground. What happens? Oh, dear God. We pull the thing up. Somebody boil some water. You put the thing, oh, no, I hope the kid didn't get any germs. And 4th kid comes along. Ding. Like, probably good there's a little dirt on it. Help the immune system. You expand your understanding of parenting. I mean, does anybody get married and after 1 year you're like, totally got this down. I know everything about you, honey. Nothing else to learn. Like, no, I mean, we don't do it in anything else. But think about how sometimes we bought the lie that we're supposed to do that with God. No, nothing's supposed to change. This is the way God is. Don't tell him. No, God doesn't change, but our understanding of God should always be changing. Because we should be maturing in the faith. We're meant to grow in the faith. So there is this evolving, there is this transitioning as we continue to get to know God. It's a pilgrimage of the heart. Ironically, we'd think one another immature and unhealthy in all the other aspects of life if we wouldn't evolve and grow and understand. And so when it comes to Journey, our desire as a church is to keep showing up with a spirit of wonder. It's how we interpret Jesus' teachings, to understand the story of God as inclusion and transcendence. Some people call us a non-denominational church, but you could call us an interdenominational church. And even that I'm not sure is the right term, because while there are people of lots of different denominations, some people have never been even part of a denomination. And if you don't know what that is, that's coming in a couple of weeks. But just terms that we use for organizing people of faith. And sometimes the terminology has just been a box, and the box has then been used for control, because we have a temptation toward control. Again, Heschel says this: awe is a sense for the transcendence. When someone is awesome, when it's full of awe, he says it's a sense for the transcendence, beyond the senses. It transcends what we can see, feel, touch, hear, smell. For the reference everywhere to mystery beyond all things. So we go, you know what, there's more going on in the universe than I can really describe. There's a sacredness to this. And it enables us to perceive in the world intimations of the divine. What he's saying is, God's hidden everywhere if we just had eyes to see. An intimation of the divine. You're like, that might have been God. I think that's a display of the love of God. What we cannot comprehend by analysis, we become aware of in awe. Have you ever been to a concert and just been incredibly inspired? Maybe a tear leaked out or a smile across your face, or you're standing with your hands in the air, and people are like, "Are you in worship?" Maybe, I don't know, but I meant to, like, you just love the music, and what's happening is you couldn't analyze what was happening, but you're in awe of it. So our hope as a church is to create enough space in our lives, in our gatherings, in our relationships, in our conversations for curiosity and wonder. We wish to endlessly remove obstacles that keep you from communing with God. It's one of the reasons we don't have just kind of a bazillion programs here. And I know sometimes that's a negative because you go, I want to connect with more people, and could you guys have more activities? It'd be easier to connect, and I get it. And so we've tried to do like more men's things and women's things and whatever. But part of it is we don't do a bazillion programs because we actually want you to be out in the world with people. We want you to be interacting with people. We don't want you to feel like, oh, here's the checklist. I got to be here for this event and this program and this thing. We want to remove obstacles so that you will actually immerse yourself in a relationship with God and with people. And so our Sunday gatherings, our villages, those are our small group communities. They're designed to offer you a place to express gratitude. That's part of the reason we gather. One of the reasons we're building a building is so that we can come together, gather in gratitude, and have a space to bring our questions, bring our fears, bring our doubts. Lay them down, so to speak, like speak them out, confess them, and come collectively. And then be reminded and guided by the grace of God. So I want to answer a couple of the questions that came in. We've been asking you to send questions in the middle of this series, and so I'm going to answer two questions. One's kind of a surface question, one's a kind of a more robust question. But this was a good one. I think it was a lady, and the question was, I always worry more that in the church we speak Christianese. If a person walked into church for the first time, it could seem cliquish, or they might have no idea what's being said. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure it's good or bad, but I think it's being sensitive. And I love this question because from our perspective, we do relanguage a lot of things in the church because sometimes you do feel like, man, I got to know the secret language to get in. Now, the funny thing is, in some ways, we've avoided certain words because some words in church world have been weaponized to hurt people. Or people got a lot of baggage with stuff. So we've kind of made up a lot of words. Like if somebody walks up and they go, hey, I want to be a part of, well, this would be a common question. Do you guys have a Bible study? We might go, well, we have a village. To which they'd go, I don't know what that is. To which we'd go, good. Now we've reframed the conversation. And they go, okay, what's a village? And we say, have you ever been to a recovery group? They go, that's a little different than my old church. And so we just say, no, in our small groups, we tend to just lead out like, I'm Jamie, hi, I got achievement issues, and like, nice to meet you. Oh, okay. I'm Ruth, I might have a problem too. But like this is just kind of who we are. So it might be a little different than your previous experience. So we do relanguage things. But at the same time, we're an organization, and kind of anytime you're in any organization, it has some languaging. So there's always so I appreciate the question and the sensitivity. We try to do both. We know you're gonna have to learn some words, because if you worked for Apple, you'd have to learn like the words for Apple. If you worked for Microsoft, those words might be a little different. You'd have to learn a different language. So there's a little bit of that. But yes, let's be sensitive to one another and not just assume people know what we're talking about. And one of those things that we've probably tried to avoid here is academic words. To get lost in the academic of it all, especially words that end with ology. So you don't typically have a series here like, we're going to talk about soteriology, eschatology, ecclesiology, and hopefully you'll come in and we'll have a wonderful time talking about the transmutation of Christ. And some of you would be like, yeah, cool, I'm going to get a biscuit. And like 10 of you might stay and we'd have a nice conversation. So while the academic words can be helpful, a lot of times they're cumbersome. And so even this title, Streams of Theology, that's not a title you're going to hear very often. You're not just going to hear a lot about that word because we have 30 minutes on a Sunday. Most of us are like, yeah, I'm dealing with this week. Can we talk about that? Now we have Bible studies. We have some other things that we do where we kind of do a deeper dive for those of you who want a little bit more of an academic thing. Or we've written books. And we've done some other things to kind of supplement that. We started doing Facebook Lives. We've got some of those now online. And actually, Kevin's working on a thing called the Journey Exchange where we actually host all of our content. So we're trying to create a library for those that go, I want to go deeper, but this Sunday's kind of like, I'm walking in with my stuff. Remind me about life, who I am before God, and what I've been called to do. So I just wanted to say a few of those things because it leads me to my next question, and the next question is this. The question that we've been asked is, okay, so you guys have been in this series on the Bible, and so we kind of get what you don't believe. Or we kind of get a lot of your questions. What exactly is Journey's theology? So I'm going to answer that question-ish. I thought I'd try and answer it like this. This is what I think other people would say about Journey's theology. Some people would say, at Journey Church, they believe in narrative theology. And they would say that about us because of our emphasis on story. Because we pay a lot of attention to story arc. We think it's in the Bible, that there's a grand narrative. And that order, disorder, reorder is a constant cycle that people live in. And so another way of looking at it is death and rebirth, or crucifixion and resurrection. So we see these as motifs in the Bible, and so we talk about them quite a bit. So some people may say, Journey is really into narrative theology. I would go, yeah, some. Maybe not all. Some people would say, Journey's really into missional theology, meaning we have an emphasis on those who aren't connected to the church, or we really pay attention to those who may be outside the faith, or we have a sensitivity to those who've been who've left the church, or felt abandoned by the church. And we love church planting, so we like sending other churches out. We like going to other countries and serving people and carrying the love story out. So some people might say, well, the Journey's a church of missional theology. Actually, somebody wrote this on a review, and I don't really know what they meant, but I kind of loved it. In the review it put, this is a church trying desperately not to be a church. And I was kind of like, yeah, I like that. That's pretty funny. That's what, people have lots of things to say about us, so I'm just telling you what I think people would say. People are really into names, so it's helpful for some people because they need a container. And so I'm just telling you, these are the containers I think people would use. Some people would say Journey's a Trinitarian theological church because of our emphasis on the three persons of Christ, and we don't see God just as a noun, but we see God as a verb. Meaning, we talk a lot about how God has invited us into this flow. That's part of how we interpret the kingdom of God. That there's this divine dance of the Trinity in relationship, and we're invited into it. And so God is also the ground of being. So actually being present to one another is actually engaging with God. Just the act of presence is tapping into the divine. So some people would say that's a Trinitarian theological church. Some would say Journey's a church that believes in incarnational theology. They'd say this because of our emphasis on the whole person. Some churches believe that this human carton, the humanity, is evil, and that God's redeeming it or fixing it or cleaning it up, or they'd have a lot of different versions of that. We don't believe that this carton is evil. We believe we were inherently created good, that we are children of God, that we are imprinted with the image of God. In the Latin, that's the imago Dei. We believe that there is a fall of humanity, so there's sinful nature on humanity, but because we believe that this thing matters, then suddenly the physical body matters. So we're actually meant to be a steward of the physical body. We see that the same as the planet. So we actually are meant to be responsible for the planet. The theology I grew up in said the planet's going to burn away and die, so it's not that big a deal to take care of the planet. It's just going to burn up anyway. God's going to come destroy the planet. We don't see it that way. We see God as restoring all things. So the physicality actually matters. There's an inherent sacredness in physical matter as well as the spirit and the soul. So some people would say Journey believes in incarnational theology. There'd be aspects of that I'd say yeah, and aspects I'd say no. And then some people would say Journey believes in kingdom theology. And this is because of our belief in Jesus' teaching that the kingdom is here, present, right now, and not yet. The kingdom is at hand, and the fullness of the kingdom is still coming. And we talk a lot about the kingdom. And that's where I thought I'd park a little bit. Our story obviously kicked this off, and I thought we'd drop in a little bit on this. If you say, Jamie, is there, because we've been giving some suggested reading along the way, is there a book that's influenced you in this understanding? I would say yes. There's a book called The Divine Conspiracy by Dallas Willard. So this would be one of my suggested reading texts for the series. It took me about 3 years to read this book. Now, I will say this. I read with a highlighter and a ruler and a pen, and I'm a little OCD, so, you might read a little faster than me, but I'm like, wow. I mean, that's how I read. So this book it's meaty, it's thick, it's a deep dive. There's another book that came out today about the kingdom, written by another guy. So I wrote this book is Into the Kingdom, and there's a story behind this book, and I don't have time for the whole story, but this has actually been a 4-year journey of writing this book. And my son walked up, he goes, "You're releasing a book today?" Sorry, haven't been talking about it. It's been 4 years. Have you ever worked on something and then you kind of happened, it was a little anticlimactic? I started this 4 years ago. But it's finally in paperback form, and Austin, who plays steel guitar, he edited it for me, helped me make my grammatic, fixed all my grammar. But anyway, the goal for this was to give you something a little less dense than the divine conspiracy. And the goal for this is to give you it's full of anecdotes, most of them are my family or my travels. But if you grew up hearing that heaven was just an afterlife thing, and the idea that heaven is here now is a new concept, then this book's for you. It really talks at length, and I use the Lord's Prayer as a part of it. It talks at length about how to access the kingdom now. How do I be in the kingdom? How am I immersed in its rhythms and get washed in the way of Christ? So we got those out front. All the proceeds go to the building, so it's just for Journey. So if you haven't given to the building yet, this is a great opportunity. Give to the building, buy 10 of them, give them away for Christmas, and you get to take something home. And by the way, it's not on Amazon or anything else. We just did a run for Journey. So we just did a short run. They're here. We'll probably try and put them on Amazon or something like that maybe next month, but that's for you. Matthew 4:17, Jesus' very first line in his ministry. He's baptized, he's tempted out in the desert by Satan, and then he comes back and ministry begins, and his first line is, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, has come near, is arriving." The reason you hear us talk a lot about the kingdom is because if you do want to know about Journey's theology, the one thing I'll tell you is this. At the center of the orbit, of the gravitational pull of everything we understand about God, is the person of Jesus Christ. We see Jesus at the center of it all. In him, all things are held together. In him, all things are one. And what did Jesus spend most of his time talking about? The kingdom of heaven. So that's one of the reasons you'll hear us talk a lot about that. It's his opening line. It's the introduction and the conclusion about the challenging paradigm of believing, seeing and awakening to our identity in another world. And it's why this line has been here for so long. This is coming down here probably in a few weeks, because the remodels, all that stuff starting in its process. But this line, awaken to our true identity in Christ. Jesus is teaching about the kingdom is to say, you're an alien and a stranger in this world. Your identity is in another way of being. The world is broken, and so your default is greed and lust and jealousy, but the kingdom's default is the fruit of the Spirit: patience, joy, long-suffering, goodness. And these are the characteristics of the kingdom when you're in your true identity. And so that's what you're going to hear from us over and over again, is at the center of this whole thing is not the church, it's not the Pope, it's not the Bible, it's Jesus. He's at the center of all we believe. C.S. Lewis captures it beautifully. He says this: the Bible, read in the right spirit and with the guidance of good teachers, will always bring us to him. It is Christ himself, not the Bible, who is the true word of God. And this is where the church at times has gotten off track. If you're in a Catholic experience, sometimes you went searching for God, but you stopped at the church, you stopped at the Pope. If you're in a Protestant experience, you went looking for God and you stopped at the Bible. But these are just meant to be a portal to know God. And so we're saying, and especially in this series, we don't place our trust in the Bible, we place our trust in God, The Bible is a perspective that helps us get to God, but we don't end there, and the temptation is to end there and create a new box. And unfortunately, what typically happens when you want certainty, think about it, it usually leads to rigidity, and rigidity usually leads to control. And as soon as you have control, what's the number one thing that comes with control? Fear of losing it. As soon as you believe you have control, you start to build structures to make sure you maintain it. And then what drives your life? Fear. I remember the early days of Journey. We were in the factory, and the guy who owned the factory is a guy named Calvin Lehue. And I remember we were growing, and we had way too many people for our space. We were in Building 8. And I remember going to Calvin and him going, well, we've got another church that's leaving Liberty Hall. Would you like to switch and go to that other space? And I remember saying to Calvin, oh, Calvin, I don't know. We've got like 300 people, and I like pastoring 300 people. Like, I kind of don't want any people to come. And he's kind of a metaphysical guy, and he was like, healthy organisms grow and mature and reproduce, right? Like if it's healthy, it grows, and if it's not growing, it's dying. I was like, oh, yeah. And he was like, what's the deal? I was like, I don't know, I feel like we might lose kind of our DNA. And he's like, well, did you feel that way when you started? I was like, oh, no, no, all I had to go on was faith. I was like, oh, okay. Where's the contract? He was a good salesman. We had to grow. Because if you're healthy, you're growing or reproducing. And then I do think there's a place where that's one of the questions we ask here a lot is like, how do we maintain a sense of intimacy as we grow, but also reproduce? And what does that look like? That's an ever-present tension we live in. Our goal is not to get lost in fear and control, but to remain in faith. And one of the ways we do this is by staying involved in the book, because the book is always telling us something about faith. The Bible is communicating something if we have eyes to see it. Heschel again says this: we have so much to say about the Bible that we're not prepared to hear what the Bible has to say about us. Sometimes we just keep talking about it. We don't listen to it. The Bible is not primarily man's vision of God, but God's vision of man. The Bible's not man's theology, but God's anthropology. Now we're back to academic words here, but I love what he's saying, which is we keep wanting to put God in a box and go, here's my theology. And the story of God is God going, well, here's how I interact with man, and you can't put it in a box. One of the reasons you keep coming back to this text is because people are really hard to predict. And not one person is exactly the same. Every person is unique and different. Come into this book, read these stories, listen to the teaching, and pay attention to the nuances of humanity. Walter Wink says this: what draws us to the sufferings of God's messengers is not the perfection, but broken wholeness. How about those two words next to each other? There's a juxtaposition. Broken wholeness. It is in the crucifixion of our idealized self-images that we discover our true being, which includes those aspects that we would rather disown. Feel the weight of that for a second. There's a part of you that you'd wish wasn't there. In your story, part of maybe this thing. I'd like for this not to be here. And Wink is making the point that guess what? The Bible exists for you to be reminded that it belongs. And all the stuff that's jacked up in you, it's meant to be there because it keeps reminding you that you need God. Yeah, but I got shame. Yeah, but I got fear. Yeah, but I got all this pain. I'm suffering this. Yes, because suffering leads you to something. I want you to imagine the stories of the Bible told through Instagram. Matter of fact, I should just start accounts. I'm going to start King David's Instagram. He's got a spear, maybe the head of an enemy right here. Like, that's one picture. Another picture is him like with a big banquet eating. Another picture is, well, him with a lot of ladies. I don't know if that's good, but that would be one of the pictures. Another picture. This would be his Instagram story. All the things that seem wonderful about being a king. You know what's not in his Instagram story? His massive failures. Which maybe it should reframe how we do Instagram. Maybe what we should do is like, here's a picture, like put a picture with you and your wife or you with the kids, like, eating ice cream. And everybody's scrolling through like, what a beautiful family. Like, that's utopia, man. That family, man, they got it down. Nothing but joy, happiness. Then like an hour later when you're ripping each other apart, like put a picture of that too. Just have that, like, that's your next picture. People are like, man, that family's messed up. That's the Bible. We're supposed to go to the Bible and go, man, that's messed up. Because that's me. When you're reading the Bible and you're like, man, David is a singer-songwriter, several hit songs. He's got like a lot of hit songs. This Psalms book, he wrote a lot. Wow, he's amazing. Oh, dear God, what did he do there? Uh-oh. Kids, we're not going to talk about that story. We're going to keep moving on. So then, David had a boy named Solomon by a different mommy. And then he started having a lot of kids, and he's such a great king. And, his son here wants to kill him. But that's okay. David just ran with his tail between his legs because he's so codependent. And let his son take over the kingdom. Yeah, I know we thought he was a warrior, but he's a wuss. Okay, all right. Let's talk about Solomon. He had everything he wanted. Oh, he's got his own book. He says it was worthless. All right. Great. Like, that's what the Bible's supposed to do. It's supposed to blow up our idealized images of ourselves. So when you're lost in your shame thing and your perfection, like, I can't believe I did that, I'm such an idiot, I'm such a failure, welcome to the rest of humanity. And David was a man after God's own heart. What? Go to Hebrews and look up the Hall of Faith. Samson was a man of faith. Samson's in here? Yeah, that guy had some problems. And he was a man of faith. Let me summarize like this. When we read the Bible, we are forced into radical acceptance. Starting here. Radical acceptance. Beauty and flaws. Successes, failures. Triumphs, shame. Both. And when you start here, it's a little easier to give it there. When your kid comes up, full of curiosity and wonder and goes, Dad, you're not going to believe, and there goes the beer all over the floor. There goes the milk. And your child, full of curiosity and wonder, has interrupted you. They've inconvenienced you. They've disrupted your depression. What? What are you doing? Pick that up. I can't believe. And you lose your mind, and you squash their spirit, and it would be better for a millstone to be hung around your neck. And you know what? That verse rings real true as soon as you have time to stop and reflect and go, it would have been better for me to be thrown in the deepest ocean than for me to do what I just did to my kid. That sucks. What was I thinking? Why would I do that? My child was displaying the kingdom, and I crushed it with my idolatry of convenience. And when you feel the weight of it, it's a millstone around the neck. Now here's the thing about the Bible. It doesn't have to stay there. You get resurrected from the water. The millstones, the knot's untied. And God goes, tell you what, we're going to make that belong right there. You know how you just blew it with your kid tonight before you put him to bed? I want you to sit down with them on the edge of their bed and go, hey, you know I yelled at you? I just want you to know I'm really sorry. And your kid, who's typically closer to the kingdom than we are, will probably go, oh, it's okay, Daddy. Is that simple? Yeah, it's okay. I sometimes get mad too. Okay. Hugs. Good night. You know what happened? Restoration and redemption, and you just modeled for your kid an important skill that they're going to have to practice for the rest of their life. David was a politician full of lust and greed who was redeemed, included, and loved by God. Paul was a murderer, probably killed the first deacon, a guy named Stephen, full of anger and violence. Paul was redeemed, included, and loved by God. Rahab was a high-priced escort who was redeemed, included, and loved by God. She also shows up in the Hall of Faith. Ruth was an immigrant outsider who worshipped false gods. And Ruth was redeemed, included, and loved by God. Put your name in there. Jamie, he was a legalistic manipulator when he first came to faith. He was redeemed, included, and loved by God. Jamie went through a season of panic and fear and shame. Included, redeemed, loved by God. What about you? All your failures, your shame, your fear. If you just awaken to it, if you can listen, if you have ears to hear, there's a knock at the door. There's a knock at the door. Love is standing at the door. Do you know how your kids typically respond to the knock at the door? Oh, who's here? I'll go. We sit on the couch. We're not sure. Childlike wonder and humility runs to the door and says, yes, Jesus, come in and have a meal with me. It's probably been too long. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? Place of reflection. Whatever helps you focus. If you're journaling, journal. Let's stay with that imagery for just a minute, would you? So stay in that space of prayer. Just would you imagine sitting in your room, bedroom, living room, kitchen, just put yourself in one of the spaces that you're comfortable or familiar with. And the knock is at the door. I'm referencing a passage from the book of Revelation, chapter 3, verse 20. And Jesus says, I'm at the door. I'm not going to barge in. But if you like, I'd love to hang out. Be in relationship. Let the kingdom wash over you. Right now, not tomorrow, not yesterday, just here in this space right now. What do you want? Are you ready to let go of the temptation for control? This quest for certainty to somehow soothe your anxiety and instead enter into a relationship that's unpredictable and full of faith and yet love itself? If that imagery is helpful, would you just stay in that space and just form some language around it? Have a conversation with God. And I want you to think of it like having a conversation with love. If that imagery doesn't work for you, just form your own prayer. But this is just a space for you to be in the presence of God. In a minute, the band is going to sing. You're welcome to stand up and sing. You can stay seated and pray. There's no rush. Just be in his presence.